Amid the staggering number of political and policy controversies that roil Washington is a small but vital issue that affects every American. It's our air traffic control system. And the consequences of changing it or not changing it could be huge. Every time you board a plane, you're putting yourself at the mercy of an inefficient, antiquated system that hasn't seen any meaningful improvement in decades. Status quo special interests have kept Americans stuck with an air traffic control system that rations capacity at the busiest airports, imposes delays due to automated equipment and processes and procedures, and it costs far more than it should. This could all be changed. Congress has the power to bring our air traffic control system into the 21st century. They just need to do it.
Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Every time you board a plane, you're putting yourself at the mercy of an inefficient system guided by 1930s radio, 1950s radar surveillance, and paper, ticker tape, flight tracking. Far from being the envy of the world, the U.S. system for guiding aircraft is a backward analog relic in a digital age. Joining me to figure out how do we go from where we are to where we need to be is Bob Poole, who is the founder of Reason Foundation and is the Director of Transportation Policy there. He's an MIT-trained engineer, advised the Reagan administration, both Bush administrations, Clinton, and also served as an advisor to the Trump transportation team on all things transportation. And I consider Bob the country's, if not the world's, leading expert in solving transportation issues using private sector solutions. So, Bob, it's a pleasure to have you here. And
thanks, Bill.
I've been reading about you and reading what you write for years, and so it's great to see you here in the flesh.
Glad to be here.
So, Bob, where are we right now with the system? How did we get here, and then what do we do about it? And I know this is a complicated issue. We got 20 minutes.
The problem is that we have the Federal Aviation Administration, which is basically a safety regulatory agency, but embedded within it is this would-be high-tech service business that's high technology intensive, that's supposed to guide planes through the sky safely, keep them separated, and so forth. It's a relic because it is captive of the federal budget. It's embedded in a very conservative bureaucracy. It cannot issue revenue bonds to finance large-scale modernization. It has to exist year to year on the dribs and drabs that Congress appropriates. Whenever there's a budget crisis,
it depends on the authorization every year. And I think we had a sequester in 2013,
yeah, they had a sequester.
Which meant
they've had times when the aviation ticket taxes that we pay on our air tickets are suspended, and there's no revenue coming in. There's all these bizarre problems that should not be there. And the good news is that 60 countries in the last 30 years have taken their equivalents out of their National Transportation Agency, made it self-supporting, freestanding, basically a utility service.
New Zealand kicked this off in the 80s.
New Zealand was the first one in 1987.
1987?
31 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's become the global standard now. And in fact, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, in 2001 said their good practice should be organizational separation of air safety regulation and the provision of air traffic services. Most countries have done it. We have not. And the reason is the status quo. People who benefit from the status quo in which people who operate planes don't pay directly for the service. They pay aviation taxes that go into the federal treasury.
Well, that's a flow-through. Basically, we pay aviation taxes.
We pay our
ticket.
Pay them. That's right. It's on our ticket tax. The lion's share comes from passenger ticket fees.
Yeah.
The business jets are the worst problem because they pay a tiny fuel tax. They pay about 1% of the total budget for air traffic control, but they use between 10 and 20%, depending on which part of the system you're talking about.
So
this is a great deal, and they don't want to give it up.
Our current system subsidize corporate CEOs
it does
in their planes?
Whoa, what a revelation, right?
It seems like a
But
no-brainer.
But that's the way it's been
As a former
historically.
CEO, I mean,
The ironic thing is that when air traffic control started, it was
Yeah.
started by airlines as a nonprofit corporation
Yeah.
that they paid for directly, and it was taken over. Herbert Hoover, during with the head of the Commerce Department, took it over, said the government should run it.
That was our engineering president.
Our engineering
He thought
president.
government should run everything.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
He wanted everything. It was part of the progressive era movement that there's one best way to do things. The government role should be much bigger than envisioned by the founding fathers.
Mm-hmm.
So they took all kinds of things into the government, and that's we're still stuck with that today.
So what is the system now? It's part of the FAA, and the solution is to create a new entity that would govern air
Right,
traffic control.
Well,
Now,
to take
now,
it
is
out
this
of the
a-
FAA,
is
it would
this
still
a-
be regulated. The FAA would still be the safety. Today, it regulates airlines, airports, issues private pilot
So
license,
it'd
so forth.
be regulated like utilities, perhaps.
Yes, yes.
So you'd have
Well, no.
government-
Well, actually, it would be
different-
basically regulated for safety by
Okay.
the FAA. Air traffic control is inherently a monopoly, and so the model that I proposed and that has been adopted and worked well in Canada for the last 22 years is a nonprofit user-governed corporation. We have lots of nonprofit utilities in the United States, and
Mm-hmm.
if the users are on the board, they have an incentive not to have
Users being
the
the
people who
airlines,
fly,
the general aviation,
business jets, everybody who flies
Pilots
planes,
Association.
pilots associations, exactly. All of those would have seats on the governing body, and their interest is have an efficient system that does not have monopoly prices or anything. So it would be self-regulating economically, but we ultimately agreed an appeal process to the DOT secretary, the Secretary of Transportation, in case any user group thought they were being unfairly treated as a minority position on the board of governors.
Now, is this the same structure that Canada uses,
exactly
New
the
Zealand
same
uses?
structure,
These
yes.
six, is there any other
Well,
major country
Canada-
that doesn't have?
No, Britain does it differently. They have
Yeah.
what they call a public-private partnership in which the government owns 49%.
Yeah.
Airlines and a big pension fund and a few other and the controllers own various pieces of the 51%, and that has worked okay. It's not the lowest cost, most efficient system, but they are doing good technology modernization in the UK.
Now, are there safety issues with the current system that could be addressed by
Well, there's
switching
safety
over?
issues in the sense that you get the highest safety from having the best technology, the most modern things, and we are lagging so far behind, as you said in the introduction. We don't have things that are standard practice in Canada, like digital communication, digital messaging between controllers and pilots in real time instead of voice
We
transmissions.
still got the Chuck Yeager system. Where
We still have,
We got
you know,
the
they're
drawing.
talking-
The drawing of
They're
it. Well,
talking on crowded frequencies.
Yeah.
People sometimes mishear things. And
so in an age of texting, we're
yes,
now
in an age
using
of
the
thing, we're
voice.
still on voice,
Yeah.
on analog voice, and we don't have air traffic control to speak of over the oceans because there's no place to put radar.
In other words, you've got to fly close to the places where you have the towers.
well,
Too
when you
far-
fly across, you have what's called procedural separation.
Yeah.
Where they have these huge buffers, like 30 and 60 miles, fore and aft and side by side, the flight tracks, because the controllers only know approximately where they are.
Yeah.
And this could be much safer and more efficient.
They only know approximately. With,
only know
I mean,
approximately
with Google
where they-
Maps, which can tell you which side of the street you're on. It's an
but not over the oceans. So what Canada innovated, Canada came up with a global satellite-based system that another about 8 or 9 of these air traffic corporations around the world have invested in. And the satellite constellation they held only 1 or 2 more launches to have 66 satellites in orbit continuously that will provide basically radar-like separation everywhere on Earth, including all of the oceans and the polar regions and the mountains over Tibet where there's no radar.
Well, you also mentioned that we've got a zigzag system now.
We
When-
still
Even
do.
when we're flying over the continental United
Yep.
States, planes have got to fly
Those
where
radio
they can.
beacons, yeah, I mean, there are some exceptions. Controllers can, using some technology,
Yeah.
do some workarounds and give people direct routes, but they can only do a certain number of those at any given time because it's somewhat labor intensive the way it works. So with a more modern system, we'd have all direct routes other than routing around huge thunderstorms and this kind of thing. And in fact, flights would be shorter in time. They'd burn less fuel. They'd be more environmentally friendly. but we're not close to having that.
Well, in the system we have now, as I understand it, 50% of flight delays are caused by air traffic or in New York, in the New York
yes,
area.
yeah, and but that is more an airport problem than it is air traffic. Now, there's things the air traffic system could do to make the landing rate more at each of those congested airports, but there's not. You really need more runways, and this is a huge political problem. There's some political support been growing in the last decade.
Yeah,
for
people
adding
don't want
a runway
runways in their
at
backyard.
JFK
Yeah,
and
yeah,
adding a runway at Newark, but there's no consensus. The
so
FAA
that's-
has not shown any leadership in doing that.
This idea is not going to solve that problem.
No, this is not going to solve that problem. It's going to help at the margins, but it's not going to solve it.
Now, you've talked about something called flight progress strips.
Yes.
Which
I
are,
wish- I should have brought
which
one
are
with
pieces
me.
of paper. Well,
Yes, yeah.
for anybody just listening, let me
Right,
describe it. It's
right.
about 4 inches long. It's yellow, and it's got wood on it. What's on it?
Well, it's got the flight number and the airline and a few other bits and pieces about the track. And when a plane is given clearance to take off, it goes from the controller who controls the actual permission to land. A runner takes that strip to the next controller.
They walk it over to
They
them.
walk it over, yeah. And they stack them up on little racks. When Matt Lauer was still
Why
on
am I
the
feeling
Today
this
Show,
is not safe?
well, this is certainly subject to error. In
Yeah.
Canada and in the UK and in several dozen countries, they have electronic flight strips. They just hit a button on the computer and
Sure.
it passes to the next guy's terminal. Or we're going to have this starting to be implemented maybe by 2021 in some control towers and facilities, but we're a long ways from that now.
Well, I think actually 2021, you mentioned 2026 might be more realistic. So we've got to wait
Probably
another
to
8 years.
have all the facilities equipped, yes, yes.
So so we have a system now which we have excise taxes
Right.
on airline tickets, which passengers pay for. And so we've got basically the system subsidized by commercial airline passengers.
Right.
And people not paying into this system are general aviation plane operators, which would be corporate jets.
Well, they're
which
paying a
would be
little bit with the fuel
crop
tax,
dusters,
but,
things like that,
yeah.
people that fly back and forth in ranches and farms
Yep,
in the
yep.
Midwest and that sort of thing. But they provide only 2% of the
Right,
of the
of the
revenue. So
revenue.
it's not nothing.
It's not nothing, but it's not in proportion to the use. The big offenders are the business jets and turboprops because they fly at high altitudes. They use all the same services as any jetliner, and yet they pay the pittance instead of something approaching. Now, all over the world, the United States is the only civilized country that does not charge business jets standard weight and distance charges. This is universal practice around the world, and business jets do not suffer. It's a thriving industry worldwide.
No, they can afford to pay.
They can easily afford to pay.
If you can afford a
But
jet,
the
you can
Trade
afford to pay.
Association, NBAA,
Yeah.
had its claim to fame and membership contributions and its political action committee is that we protected you from ruinous user fees for air traffic control.
So let's talk about the politics of
Yes,
this.
yes.
Because it seems to me there's a compelling case to make this change.
There is.
One of the things you mentioned that's important, this is not a for-profit entity that needs to be formed. This is
No.
more or less like a cooperative.
More
It's
like a user
nonprofit.
co-op. Yes, yes.
And you've got all the people who have stakes in the system and whose motivation is just to make it better and better, faster, cheaper,
right.
more efficient, that sort of thing. And there's no conflict of interest
Yeah,
here.
and that model has worked superbly in Canada for 22 years since
Yeah.
they started Nav Canada.
And the revenue from this would be paid by the stakeholders in the system.
That's right.
In the form
Everyone who
of
flies would
how
pay
would that
fees
work?
for the services
How would
that
that
would go
work?
directly to the company.
Okay.
I'm modeling as Nav Canada now. So every year they get a certain amount of revenue. They have a budget. If they get in more revenue than they budgeted for, they have three choices. They can pay down some debt. They can lower the fees for the next year, or they can buy some capital equipment instead of having to go to the capital markets and finance it.
Well, you also mentioned that an entity like this can raise money. You can issue
yeah.
bonds.
Oh, that's right.
And
I mean-
one of the problems we've got with our current system with the fluctuations and
Yeah, there's
appropriations
no
from Congress
financing. It's just
is
cash
you
flow.
can't. Same problem we have in education.
That's
There's
right.
There's no
That's
ability
right.
for R&D or for CapEx.
These
capital
guys, the
expenditures.
big ones, Nav
Yeah.
Canada and Air Service Australia and NATS in the UK, have investment-grade credit ratings. I mean, they're a monopoly provider of a vital public service. What's not to like to a bond buyer?
So
Assuming they're well run.
We're going to get into whose interests are being served or not served here, but as currently constituted, if you're working in the air traffic control booth, you're a government employee.
Yes.
And you have a government union.
Right.
And you're in that job forever or whatever.
Well, it's civil service. So
civil
it's,
service.
Yeah,
You get all
you're
protected by all the civil service rules. And if you're in that situation, it's like education. There's no incentive to invest in technology to replace people.
Well, the interesting thing is, we've had a reform effort going on in fits and starts over the last 20 years.
Not that I don't like people, but
right.
Maybe.
But this last round that I was very heavily involved in on 2 different task forces, one from the Business Roundtable, one from the Eno Center for Transportation, that brought stakeholders together and talked. The Controllers Union supported the effort to create a NAV Canada type system. They are so fed up with having inferior, antiquated technology.
They don't want to carry the yellow strips either.
No, they don't want to do that. They are embarrassed by it. They go up to Canada and they sit with the controllers there. Oh my God.
Okay, so they're on board.
They're on board. It was all the other government unions that saw this as a slippery slope. If we take 30-some thousand people, which is not all controllers, 30, out of the FAA.
I see. If you do it here, you're going to do it everywhere.
It could be done everywhere. So
if you prove it works here, then we might look at everything.
Every single other government employee union was mobilized against this, which appealed to Democrats in Congress. I mean, partly probably ideological, but it was also union PAC money and so on and so forth. And something called the FAA Managers Association that represents a couple thousand frontline supervisors also decided they were threatened by this. They didn't want to lose civil service protection. They love the bureaucracy that makes them feel important and blah, blah, blah. FAA also, because it's a government bureaucracy and civil service pay scales, they have a real tough time hiring and keeping really top-notch program managers, engineers, software people. Those people can make 2 and 3 times as much in the private sector. They can get bonuses, they can get stock offerings and so forth. So FAA then becomes dependent on contractors, on the big aerospace companies. I mean, I started out, my first job out of MIT was at Sikorsky Aircraft. I know how the game is played.
Great helicopter.
Yes, they're great helicopter. But what you want with government contracts, you want to bid competitively to get the job, and then change orders. Well, what about this? What about that? Well, that game is played relentlessly.
Picking up on change, let's in our closing moments here. Can Congress pass a bill simply saying we're going to change this from the old system to the new system?
They can.
So
that's what we had. We actually had a bill.
This solution is in the hands of Congress.
It is.
So what are the
entirely
politics
in the hands.
here?
We had a bill this year that we had a champion, Chairman Schuster of the House Transportation Committee, was all for it. It passed the House Committee with protections for general aviation. There were actually going to be no user fees by statute on even business jets and any general aviation.
So they got out.
They got out completely free.
So,
well, what happened? The politics of this, the bill with that in it never got to the House floor because of the coalition built by the business jet people. They told lies to small-town mayors, small airport directors, saying, this is a plot to have the big airlines take over air traffic control and the national airspace.
And they also told
and they're
people,
going to do this in term, all the spending is going to be biased in favor of big hub airports. You guys are going to lose out. This was all completely wrong.
And they were all told it was going to be a greedy for-profit corporation.
Exactly. They portrayed it as if it was a greedy for-profit instead of what it actually was, which was a clone of NAV Canada, nonprofit user co-op, basically.
So we need to mount, meaning you and me and whoever else, we need to mount a PR campaign for this. Or how do we get the optics?
Have been trying. I mean, the airlines were very strongly in favor of this, along with the Controllers Union, the pilots unions,
hates the airlines,
flight attendant unions were for it.
Yeah.
They all said this is going to make the system so much better. It's going to be less costly. It'll be more efficient, have better technology sooner. But this coalition, there was never a counterpart in the Senate to this bill because Senate heavily represents rural states.
And you mentioned that a lot of the members of the Congress fly planes, and they somehow
there's a huge
felt like they were
general aviation caucus that either fly planes or like the private pilots and their political action committees.
One thing I heard was that, well, this is going to hurt the rural airport.
Yes, that was the propaganda line that the business jet community, jet people sold. They bamboozled small-town mayors, small airport directors into seeing this as a plot that would disadvantage rural America, small towns, and so forth.
So the line of action here is to support Congress moving on this. Is there a bill? Is it dead now, or is it?
It's not completely dead. The House has passed its FAA. The FAA gets reauthorized every 4 or 5 years. House has already just passed the bill with the air traffic provision stripped out in order to get enough votes to pass it on the floor. The Senate has only, the Commerce Committee has approved a bill, but it's still subject. Actually, they might not have approved it. It still could be amended to include. It probably wouldn't include the whole corporation idea, but the bare minimum would be to take it out of the FAA and maybe set it up as a separate entity within the Department of Transportation. You'd at least get the arm's length safety regulation.
What's the name of this bill?
It's the FAA reauthorization bill.
FAA reauthorization.
Yep.
So the next time you, who are listening to this, are sitting on a runway in an airplane
Yes.
in a long line of planes at LaGuardia saying,
Right.
there's got to be a better way. There is a better way.
There definitely is.
And so you text your congressman and you say, support the
Air Traffic Corporation.
Okay.
Make the air traffic system into a self-funded air traffic corporation.
Got it.
And
Okay.
get it out of the government.
And you can follow Bob writing on this at
Reason.org.
reason.org.
Just by name. There's my newsletter on air traffic control. You can sign up for that. It's no charge. It comes out every month and keeps you posted on these things.
Great. Well, thank you, Bob. This is fascinating.
Thank you
Let's
very
make
much.
this happen. America's air traffic control system remains stuck in a federal regulatory bureaucracy, micromanaged by politicians, and unable to modernize cost-effectively. Yet a bill to fix this remains blocked in Congress by status quo special interests. Airline delays cost airlines and passengers some $33 billion a year in wasted time and excess operating costs. It needs to be spun off into a self-supporting nonprofit corporation, and the bill in Congress would do just that. 60 other countries, and all the other developed countries, have done this. Next time you're stuck on a plane, on a runway for hours, pull out your phone, text your congressman. The message: pass the bill.
Thanks for listening. Want more? Be sure to subscribe at thebillwaltonshow.com or on iTunes.